What's going on, guys? Got the fretboard done. We're going to walk you through the building of the fretboard. We had to come up with a brand new fretboard. I spent about 6 weeks in the spring trying to source the right ebony, the ebony used for this guitar. I've got a lot of the ebony sitting around, but it wasn't the right type. And then once I started buying pieces, they weren't perfectly black. I didn't realize how difficult it is to source nice black ebony wood now. It's a really hard thing to get. The inlays were done on easel with a .024 bit. I went through and did each fret slot on the CNC and then did the inlays on top of that. They look beautiful, really nicely done. And then we also got the Abalone side dots as well to spec this out right. We'll get you into the video here and show you how it's done. So I have an Inventables CNC, and this is their easel workspace. I went through the Super 400 inlays from DePaul Inlays a number of times to get it right. We ran it on the CNC machine. I didn't film that. That took forever. But here's the fretboard taped with the template I'm going to use to shape this out. This is a 59 template for an LP. We're going to cut this out on my new Powermatic bandsaw, new to me. And then we're going to get a top bearing bit and trim it. Got the vacuum cleaner there to clean it up and catch it. Flip this around and route on this side. Slow going, all this is sped up. And then once we get each side done, we're going to throw on a binding bit. This is the Stumac Binding Bit, and this is going to take the fretboard down by about a 1/16 on each side to glue binding. I'm going to do white binding, which is what was on there. Run each side. We're going to go ahead and glue in the inlays. I mix up some epoxy and the Mohawk ebony fill. Get a paintbrush and work it into all the crevices. Lots of work on these inlays. Super 400 inlays are complicated. I must have gone back and forth 20 times to get these to sit right. I ran a couple different test pieces to make sure it did it right, and I wanted them tight and precise, and I also wanted to be able to do these again. That's the nice thing about having a CNC, is now that I've got this all set up, I can run this a couple of times. So that's the final test piece above it, and then as I put the inlays in, I make sure I get all the bubbles out with a torch. And then we just go back and forth after we pop them all in. Make sure they're pushed down. I have a knife here to make sure that they're sitting properly. My biggest fear in using thin inlays is that you sand through. So if you don't seat them properly, you'll sand through. I've done that a couple of times before. It's a huge pain. So I'll clamp that down so it sits flat, and then next we'll move to binding. I like using actual rubber cement, not the acetone method. I don't think the acetone method works properly. I had to get some additional clamps to clamp it up perfectly. So the Harbor Freight 3-inch clamps actually work nice for binding. And then we're going to make a jig to drill the side dots. I have a bunch of different size jigs, but Stumac sells the Abalone side dots. So we drilled down, got these all set up. A 332 bit, and we are close. We'll then take the Abalone dots and drop them in. Got a nice little tool to put push them down. Again, we mixed a little bit of epoxy to get them to sit. I like using epoxy, not super glue or acetone. I really want them in there. I don't want them to move. So then now we're going to glue up the fretboard. Tape the truss rod. Like I said earlier, I have a dual action truss rod in this neck. I know that once I put some string tension on this, it'll move in various ways. So I want to make sure that I have the flexibility to move the neck which way I want it. I know it's maple and sort of matchstick repaired, but I want to have that flexibility. So we're putting on some hide glue. We've got the nut set, and we'll go ahead and clamp this down. And like every woodworker I know, you can never have enough clamps. So we'll clamp it on the side to make sure it's sitting on the fretboard. And then we'll run through and just starting to add clamps. Clamp, 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 clamp. This is also why I don't level the board until it's on. You want to make sure that you've got a nice connection. The board is flat as much as it can, and then I level the board once it's glued on. That way I know it's level. I really don't like leveling the board then putting it on, because you're still going to have to sand it a little bit. So this allows me to get a nice true level board. So when I rebuilt the neck, I left it just a tad thick at the heel. That way I could sand whatever I needed to sand. And I used the router to clean it up. I've got maybe like a 30-second overhang on that spot, and we just run this through the router a couple times to get it flush with the binding. Using a really small bit there, so I can take a little bit at a time. We sand the back of the headstock off a little bit, and then I'm worried that I'm going to sand through the serial number. So instead of continuing to sand, I just take some lacquer thinner and clean off the back of the neck there from that tobacco brown. Scrape it with a razor blade. And then we'll do our final sanding here. I have two flap sanders in the shop. This is one with 120, and then we'll take this back and sand this all the way down to 320. I did recarve a little bit of it. I went back a couple times and checked. I didn't show that here, but I did go back and forth with this at 120, moved up to 180, and then 320 to get it to this state here, which is looking really nice. Still got the stamps cleaned up to 320. So then here comes the work to sand and level the fretboard with a 12-inch radius. And I'm using, 40 grit sandpaper here. And when I sand, I try and do the upper frets first and then move my way back down, and I check with a level, and I do a bunch of different sanding beams, and then I work it all the way to 220, and then I go back and start cleaning out the frets to make sure we're ready to fret. So a little bit of binding glue goes into the fret channels. You want to make sure that's all cleaned out. So the Stumac tools here are really needed to get the fret slots cleaned. And now we're going to fret. So we're going to do some Titebond wood glue, some medium high frets, which is the standard fret of Gibson, a little bit extra height on a medium fret. Place this in. Get a little bit of glue on there, tap it in. When I fret, I only do about 7 frets at a time. I let that glue sit and then do fretting over usually a day and a half. Let it dry and then come back and start cleaning up the ends. That way I don't get any movement. These are flush cut nippers. And then we'll start leveling the frets just a bit to get it flush to the fretboard. And then we'll do the bevel on the side as well. And we're ready. Time to move to the body. Getting real close. Go back and show you where we're at with the body. So next up, we are going to finish up the body. That's been the most fun. Had a couple scratches and dings and zings on this, but actually working on this in progress. And then once we get the body done, we'll slap the neck on and get going. So thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next video.